Hello. Hello. Good morning, everybody. Oh, hey, I learned something in art of hosting. You gotta raise your hand if you hear me. It didn't work too well. Hey, good morning. I want to introduce a special guest today, Andre. He helps government and educational organizations manage and train staff, employees, and clients on diversity issues without blame, fault, or guilt. His organization understands that people are doing the best they can with what they have, yet encourages them to examine themselves, explore other cultures, and become allies for others. Andre works to move people's behaviors not by pushing them or by making them feel guilty. His courses teach individuals to dissect, analyze, and make meaning of the issues that challenge us in a fair, balanced way that people can hear and understand. He motivates individuals to create something collaboratively. Andre Koen is an energetic presenter, a powerful communicator, and a dynamic teacher. There are many words to describe him, but most illustrative is Andre, the enkindled spirit. Please welcome Mr. Andre Koen.
Thank you so much. Make sure this is on. Testing. Okay, you got me? All right, great. No, it went away. Oh, I did it the other way. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Got me. All right. I just want to say it's an honor to be here, and it's so embarrassing to hear the things that you wrote about yourself being read out loud. Right? So that's all marketing stuff from my website and whatnot. I want to say that it is such an honor and a privilege to be here. I was just with Adriana and a team last week working on understanding culture and the impact of culture on our behavior. And I think we had a wonderful time there. If you know any folks who participated in that, please ask them to define culture. And hopefully we'll see if they learn the things I was trying to share with them. One thing, another thing that's important for us to realize and understand is where we are. And where are we? Where are we? And I know many of you are like, that's a really big question. What's he really asking? Like, where am I right now? Where am I in the world? Where am I mentally? Where am I? And my answer is yes, I'm asking all those things. Where are we? What is this place called? Northern what? Northern Service Center. And interestingly enough, that's part of what I saw on the sign out front. There's something else that I saw on the sign out front. Dakota County. What does that denote? What is why is that important to talk about the fact that we're in Dakota County? What's that? Because that's in our environment. Say more about that. What do you mean by that?
It's like our community and the people that we interact with.
It is our community. It's the people we interact with. What else is unique or special about being in Dakota County? Yes.
We're on indigenous land.
We are on indigenous land. We're on indigenous land. And we can never forget that. We can never forget that. Another thing that we have to be mindful of is as we walk on indigenous land, we all have privilege and power. I am a cisgendered male, which means that my biology and how I demonstrate myself in the world are congruent. I use the pronouns he and him and his. I've matriculated through higher institutions of learning, so I have degrees after my last name, those little letters after your last name. I am 6'2". My predominant language is English. I am a conservative Christian. I am, and I'm mildly attractive. And incredibly humble. Just ask me. So I walk into this room with a certain amount of privilege, and if I don't recognize that privilege, some of those privileges are things that I've earned. Some of those things were given to me by the nature of my birth. But if I don't recognize the power and privilege that I have, then I can use it as a weapon against people who may not have the same power and privilege that I have. Well, why don't you do ... Because me and my family were able to do ... And so if we don't recognize our own power and privilege, then we use it as a weapon. And so I know I get all of my religious holidays off from work, paid. Not all of my brothers and sisters can say the same. That the expectation of knowing the nuances of the English language are assumptions. And I'm sure in your departments you have lots of acronyms that you know what they mean. Where DD 214, anyone? DD, no. Okay, yes, all right, good.
Veterans discharge form.
It's a veterans discharge form. But if we don't share that, then we walk around with this knowledge that other people don't have. I was the affirmative action officer at Anoka County for 6 years, and I learned a lot about training. And what I'm going to share with you are pieces that I learned from working with our staff at Anoka County. And so, and prior to that, I was a high school teacher. I'm currently a professor at Bethel University in the education department, teaching new teachers how to close the achievement gap or the opportunity gap. And so I spend a lot of time talking about these things. And so I want to encourage you to think critically about yourself, but also recognize that we operate in a system that maximizes itself when we are divided. But we'll get to some of that stuff later. All right? I want to make sure, does everyone have something to write with? Does everyone have something to write with? If not, I have some pens and brought some pencils around. And please don't be embarrassed to say that you don't have something, because we have provided things for you. So if you don't have a pen or pencil, you can raise your hand and we can get one to you. Wonderful. You're not a bad row. You are not a bad row. So there should, if I can get just about four or five right here in this row, that'd be wonderful. Thank you so much. So what I want you to do is, okay, yes, good. All right. So what I'd like for you to do is, on the front page of your handout, you'll find 5 circles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in gray. What I want you to do is to put one thing that you value or that is important to you in each one of those circles. One thing that is of importance to you or of value to you in each one of those circles. So it could be a person, a significant other, a child, a grandchild. It could be a place like Belize or Bemidji. It could be a thing like a motorcycle boat, or a motorcycle or a boat, or it could be a concept like justice or freedom. Okay? So one thing that you value in each one of those circles. Just the gray ones at this point. Yep. And if you wrote in the white one, that's fine too. We can adjust. All right. So it looks like people have 3. No pressure. No pressure. Just whatever comes to the top of your head. Wonderful. Looks like most people have 4, if not all 5, so we'll go to the next part of this activity. What I want you to do is I want you to find a minimum of 2 people to sign on each of your circles. And I want them to sign on each of your circles that they either like or have something similar on their paper. They look at your paper and say, you know what, I like that, so I'll sign that. Or I have something similar on my paper and I'll put my initials there. All right? So either you like it or you have something similar. You have 90 seconds to do this starting now. A minimum of 2 signatures for each one. Nope. I can get this one. 60 seconds. A minimum of 2. 2 for each circle. 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 45 seconds. 2 for each circle. For each circle. Five, four, three, two, one.
Game over. Get over here.
Did anybody play those Mortal Kombat games or anything like that? Yeah.
Finish him. Shrioken?
No, that's another. All right. So as you were walking around the room, first of all, was there anyone that was able to get 2 for each of their circles? All right. Cool. Were there people who got more than the required 2 for each circle? All right. Cool. What were some of the numbers that people got? Did anyone get? So if we had 5 circles, 2 for each circle would be 10. Did anyone get more than 10? 10 signatures. Yeah, you did. Oh, how many signatures? 11. 11 signatures. Anyone more than 11? Yes. 14. 14. Yes. 15. Somebody said overachievers. 15. Anyone more than 15? Yes. You have 15 as well? All right, let's give it up for the 15s. Yay! So, as you were walking around the room, what are the things you saw on other people's papers that you were like, oh man, why didn't I think of that? I value that too. What were some of the things you saw on other people's papers that you had wished that you had written down?
Food.
Yes.
Job.
Job.
I never thought to put it down, but I would need that.
Right. I never thought to put that down, but I would need the job, right? Someone else. Yes. Learning was something that you value that you didn't get a chance to write down. Yes. Freedom. That's something that you valued and you didn't get a chance to kind of write that down. Now, I know you value more than 5 things, so it's kind of difficult to write down all your values on this paper, but I appreciate you doing that. Were there things that were difficult or you actually didn't get anyone to sign on? Was there anything that was either difficult to find someone to sign on or you actually didn't get anyone to sign on it? Yes.
Well, I put my husband's name, so they probably just didn't realize that that was my spouse.
Okay. Cool.
Decide on it,
So please raise your hand. We'll help her out. Please raise your hand if you value having a spouse or a life partner. Please raise your hand if that is a value to you.
Look at
All right, cool.
signatures, so what am I at now?
Right, yeah, you're like a whole lot of signatures at this point. Yeah. What was something else that was either difficult to find someone to sign on, or you didn't find someone? Yes.
Gifts and talents.
Gifts and talents. All right. So if you value either having or watching someone else's gifts or talents, please raise your hand. That gifts and talents are important. All right. Cool. One more thing that was either difficult or you didn't, or was hard to find someone to sign on. Just need one. One last thing. Home. Right? So if value, you had your hand up as well.
I was just going to say I have twins, and a lot of people signed off on my son, but nobody wanted to sign off on
Nobody wants twins. But if raising the next generation and having a home is of value to you, please raise your hand. Wonderful. So you are smart people. You work for the county. You are.
That might not be.
Oh, I'm not going to take that. But what do you think what was the point of this particular activity? What do you think is the goal of this activity? Why would I start this session with this as one of our beginning activities?
Find commonality.
Yeah, so we can find commonalities. Great. So we can find commonalities. And what?
Talk to each other.
And talk to each other, right? So it's important to find commonalities and talk to each other. What else? Why else might we have started with this activity this morning?
Find out more about ourselves.
Find out more about ourselves and what we value. Yes.
Find out the differences about
To also recognize the differences. One of the things that is important to me for us to move to this next level of human interactions is to recognize that we do have commonalities. And we also have differences. I don't know about you, but a lot of times I've gone to trainings around diversity or cultural competence or sensitivity or other trainings like that. We spend a lot of time talking about either our differences or our commonalities, but never both at the same time. Never both at the same time. And so I think part of the division that we see in our world really comes from the fact that we've succumbed to these optical illusions. Optical illusions, which differ from optical illusions, because optical illusions are those artificial barriers that drive, that don't foster human relationships. And I believe that race is one of those. I believe that race is one of those obstacle illusions. So I have a hypothesis with this exercise, and so I want to check this hypothesis with you. So when you looked at the 5 things that you wrote down, did anyone put anything that specifically would show up on an HR form in regards to their ethnic or racial background that would show up on an HR form? Did anyone put their race or ethnicity as one of those 5 things that they value? Okay, so one person. All right? So we have about how many folks in here would you say? About 90 folks? Right? So one person out of 90. All right? Please raise your hand if there's anything on there that specifically identifies your gender or your gender identity. Your gender expression, your gender identity. Specifically. So I have 2 people out of 90. 3, okay? Out of 90. All right? For this one, what I want you to do is I want you to jump up in the air and wave your hands like you don't care if you can say yes to this. Is there anything that denotes your social economic status or i.e. your tax bracket? Is there anything that specifically talks about your tax bracket that you wrote down as one of your 5 values? No takers? No takers? Okay, I got one. She's like, yeah, she did the nay-nay. I didn't say do the nay-nay. I said, she was like, hey. So why do you think that it is that for the majority of us that we did not put, in terms of 5 things that we value, why do we not put our racial or ethnic identity for the majority of us? Why do we not put our gender or gender expression for the majority of us? Why do we not put our social economic status as those things that we value? Why did those things not come up?
Oh, I guess I'll say it. Because sometimes there's we don't see them because it's more of a privilege. So,
Okay, so maybe we don't see them because they're more of a privilege?
So it's just there.
So it's just there.
I grew up, in a 2-parent household. I'm a white female. I automatically just have those things.
So you grew up in a 2-parent household, you're a white female, so there are certain things you just automatically have. All right. Other folks? Yes, sir.
Because all the things that I listed are kind of connected to my ethnicity and my identity and who I identify with and how I identify.
All right. So all the things that you listed are related to how you identify, and so they're kind of interconnected. Can I say that? Okay. Cool. There was another hand in this. Yes.
I think a lot of times we're conditioned not to talk about money or socioeconomic status. It's not polite.
It is not polite. We're conditioned not to talk about those things. All right. What else? Why else did those things come up? Yes.
I think it's things we take for granted, and when we're introspective, it's stuff we kind of reach deeper for. If it was something relating to maybe outward appearance or assumptions other people make, our list would look quite different.
Yeah. I would also suggest that we didn't write those things down because we're smart. Because we're smart. What was the task? What did I ask you to do? I asked you to write down things that are important and valuable to whom? To you. What I would argue is that the reason some of those things didn't get written down, is because they're not as important to us as the other things that we wrote down. Not saying that they're not important, but they're not as important as those other things. But what I will tell you is that outside of us, the systems that we operate in care a great deal about those things that we talked about. They care a great deal about race. They care a great deal about gender identity or gender expression. They care a great deal about our social economic status. And when we fall into those traps, we develop those obstacle illusions. And so I want to dispel some of those optical illusions so we can actually have better human relationships, because race does not exist, but it does exist. Right? How many people have seen Race the Power of Illusion, that video? Okay, cool. The rest of you, you'll have an opportunity to do it. It's available to you in a number of different outlets, and we'll look at a couple of pieces given my time, and we'll see if we have time to look at a couple of those pieces. But I want to dispel some things. So let's look at the bottom of your page, of your handout. So one of the things that we recognize is that what is this idea of social justice? What is this idea of social justice? So I grew up in the 70s, and around holiday time, we would go to a place called Olin Mills Studio for holiday pictures. Anybody do the Olin Mills? Okay. So for those of you who haven't had that luxury or that opportunity, so your parents would get you all dressed up in your finest or whatever, and you would go to this thing. And they would have this oatmeal background, just kind of gray, like nondescript background. And everybody would stand there in uncomfortable smiles and stuff. And this was before Photoshop or filters or whatever, so you got what you got. And so Olin Mills, towards the end of their run, they started trying to do fancy stuff because there were new ways to do photography, right? So the creepiest picture we have is one where we're in the family, we're sitting and we're facing the camera. And then Olin Mills said, we're going to do this new technology called an overlay. And so what the photographer told us to do was he took a picture of the family all looking this way, up towards the sky. And so they overlaid the two images, and it's just like the creepiest thing. What are they looking at, right? So Olin Mills Studio. And so every year that we would go through this, we go through this ritual of taking these family photos. And when we got the family photos back, who do you think I looked for first? Me, right? So I'm like, okay, where am I? Okay, this is what I look like, right? You ever taken those look back at those third grade photos or those things? So when you look at those old photos, where do you look first? For yourself. You look for yourself, right? Now, what would happen if you took these family photos and you knew you were there, and one set of photos, your body is there, but your face is blurred out? What would you assume? What would be one of your first assumptions? Something happened to the film, right? Something happened to the film. So that's one year that they get a mulligan on that, right? So that year, it was just bad film. Well, what happens if it happens the second and third year? Your body is there, you're there, you remember being there, people remember you being there, but your face is blurred out. What would you then start to think by year 3? That your sister erased you? Okay. We got some family issues there. What would you start to think? That it was intentional. What about 5, 6 years?
You might give up even worrying about it.
I won't even worry about it. I don't even, it's because not only, if it wasn't the machine and it wasn't my sister erasing me, then it could possibly be something wrong with me. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare and securing of blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, we do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Wonderful words. Beautiful words. Anybody's heart start beating fast when you hear those words? Mine does, right?
And the choice of words is so important, not of the United States, for the United States.
For the United States. For the United States. As those great words are being penned, both from the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, what is simultaneously happening while those great words are being penned?
Slave trade.
The transatlantic slave trade is simultaneously happening. Who's missing from this great picture? Who's missing? When we read those great words, it is interesting that the word man is used, because what we do recognize from a contextual point of view, that man was the short for human. However, it was used as a tool to exclude people because the word wasn't specific, it was contextual. Who else is missing when we read those great words and we look at this great American picture? Who else was missing? Women were missing. Who else was missing in this, as they painted this great picture? Native Americans were missing. They weren't humans, they were savages. Right? Kill the Indian and save the man. And we can suggest that other religious groups were a part of that, blah, 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 blah. So what is social justice? Social justice is getting people back into the picture. It's getting people back into the picture. It's not about special rights. We don't have special rights in the United States. We're just trying to get people back into the picture. Get them back into the picture. So if you can turn to page 2 in your handout, you'll see a history of civil rights advances that we've made in the United States to get people back into the picture. So we understand that social justice is not a touchy-feely thing. It is actually trying to get people the rights that belong to them. That belong to them. Particularly as citizens of the United States. The citizens of the United States. So let's talk about 4 truths about human beings. First, people can learn, change, and grow. That's why we're in this business, right? And who I am today is not who I was at 17. Thank God. Right? We can learn, change, and grow. Now, the funny thing about learning, changing, and growing is that you don't have to see evidence of it for it to be true. You don't have to see evidence of learning, changing, and growing to happen for it to be true. When you plant a seed in the ground, do you go back and check on it every 5 minutes? No. Why? Because you understand that the process takes time. Right? So people can learn, change, and grow. People do what they think works, even when what? Even when it doesn't work. But why do people do things that aren't effective?
It's habitual.
Because it's habitual, it has become a habit. But why did it become a habit?
Because maybe it worked once.
Because it's worked before. I love it when con men and con women get caught. They usually get caught because of their arrogance. They get caught because of their arrogance. Because they believed it worked once, it should work again. Mr. Adrian Peterson got caught up in this, and he had to take a year off of his job because of this. And why did Mr. Adrian Peterson, when he was working for the Minnesota Vikings, why did he have to take a year off?
He beat his son.
Because he beat his son, he disciplined his son. I think the technical term is he whooped him. I don't know how you spell that, but he had to take time off from that. And Mr. Adrian Peterson is an articulate person, and now I do not condone hurting children in any kind of way. But when asked why he did that, what did Mr. Adrian Peterson say with conviction? What was his answer, his reply?
That
because that's how he was raised. What did Adrian fail to realize? Things have changed. So when my wife says to my 3-year-old, "Wait till your daddy gets home," she's talking about me. I'm that one, right? So I get my stuff ready, right? So my wife has already texted me about what's going on, so I prepare myself because I'm going to discipline this girl because she needs discipline. So I walk into the house. I have lightning bolts of Zeus in one hand, and the Thor, the Thor of hammer in the other hand, and the hammer of Thor in the other hand. And I walk into the room, and I say, "You're going to get it, sister." And she says, "I'm not your sister." So now I'm disarmed, right? But I tell her, I say, "I want you to go to your room for 2 minutes. This hurts me more than it hurts you." Right? Why do I put her on punishment? Why do I give her a timeout? Why do I set a limit on that? Because the challenges she has to face are much different. The world that she lives in is much different than the world that I grew up in. What I find interesting is that Adrian Peterson, his parents learned how to discipline that way from someplace, and their parents learned how to discipline that way from someplace, and their parents learned how to discipline that way from someplace, but we never want to talk about the place that taught them how to use that form of discipline. The impacts of slavery are all through our cultures. The impact of the Native American genocide is all through our culture. Anyone ever heard of Native American fry bread? Right? Yeah. And it's funny because even Native Americans will confuse that with being cultural, and it's not cultural. Do you know why fry bread? Yes.
Because in like the commodity boxes that the government gave them, that was like the options they had were like flour.
Do you mean the new snap boxes that the government wants to give away? Like those? Right? For African Americans, did you know that hog maws and pig feet and oxtails are now considered cultural? But those were things that were left after they took all the good stuff. And now we've taken it as our own. And it's killing us. Cholesterol, high blood pressure. This stuff is delicious, but it's killing me. Right? So we have to be clear about why people do things. And people do things even though it's not beneficial, but it seemed to be beneficial in the past. Right? And then lastly, all human behavior is goal-directed, and everybody is trying to get something through their behaviors. And so we have to ask the question, what is it that you're trying to get if we want to be helpful? And then lastly, an attitude is a response to goal achievement. So my dad was my pastor. On Sunday, we would go to church from 7:30 a.m. to 11:30 p.m. We stop at 3 o'clock for chicken, not because we're black, but because chicken is delicious. So Friday night, I asked my dad for the car. My dad loves me. What does he say? I says, yes, he loves me. Right? So I get the car. I go cruising for girls. I don't know what would have happened had me and my friends found girls. We're cruising for girls. And I fill the car up with gas. I come home before curfew, give my dad the keys, and he says I have what kind of an attitude? I have a good attitude, right? So my dad and I are cool Friday night. Sunday, my best friend Dexter calls me and says, Andre, can you pick me up for the movies at noon? What do I know about Sunday? Church all day. But I'm 17. I'm invincible. And Jesus is my friend. So I go to my dad and I say, Dad, can I borrow the car? And what does he say? Not only does he say no, but he gives me the ultimate sermon. And the ultimate sermon in my household was the one leading you to hell. So the worst consequence you could get in my household was going to hell. Didn't do the dishes, going to hell. Didn't cut the grass, going to hell. Didn't make your bed, going to hell. After my dad's sermon, what did he say about my attitude? that I had a bad attitude, and I would say the same about his attitude. So what is it that actually determines one's attitude? Circumstances? Okay, let's back it up. Let's make it real personal. Anybody have a teenager in your life? Right? Anybody remember being a teenager in your life? Right? Has this ever gone down? You're sitting around doing stuff around the house, and all of a sudden the teenager gets a text. Marsha's having a party. It started 5 minutes ago. Mom, can you drop me off? And you're like, what? Well, we were just doing this thing, and then all of a sudden you want to go to Marsha's party. No, you can't go to Marsha's party. It's a last minute thing. Who does last minute things like that? Nobody does. People plan, right? You got to be better at planning. As a matter of fact, you didn't plan well to get that. You got a C in gym class because of your lack of planning. As a matter of fact, you and your brother and sister have been fighting because you guys haven't been planning time and blah, 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 blah. So you just blow up at the kid, and what happens to the kid? Transformers. You never. Oh, I hate you. And then they close the door like they own the joint. And then as a parent, you're like, oh, I just unloaded on this kid. Marsha actually she's got that acne problem, and she needs some support. So, let me. All right. What do you want? You can't go to Marsha's party. You can't stay the whole time. I'll drop you off at this time. I'll pick you up at that time. Get your stuff. Let's go. Okay. What happens to the kid's attitude? It changes. Why? Because they got what they wanted. When I was at Anoka County, we had a team, a strike force, if you will, a task force that was focusing on MPhib clients that were African American, long-term African American, and long-term American Indian, and clients on MPhib. And so the idea was to kind of figure out why they were on long-term and then get them off, right? And so we did these circles. And one of the things that we found out in the circles was that language like this was being used to apply to nice people like us. They said, whenever I go to the county, I feel like I have to wage war. I have to go in and fight for what I need. So in Anoka County, we started changing how we talk about stuff, right? So we don't want people who deserve these things to come in and feel like they have to fight us. No, so we help people get what they want. And so as a helper, if you have a person with a bad attitude that's in front of you, what do you already know? What do you already know about them?
They've experienced adversity, perhaps?
They've experienced adversity. Think about the kid. They're not getting what they want. So first, if we have someone with a bad attitude, what do we need to find out? What do you want? What do you want? Because if I can give them what they want, then I can be helpful. But what if they want something that I can't give them? That's not my responsibility to do it, and it may even be illegal for me to do it. What then do I do?
Find out what they need.
Find out what they need? What else? What's that?
Other resources.
So I can have other resources. What happens if I push you? If I push you, what's your natural response going to be?
Or push back.
You would push back. You're not supposed to, but you would, right? She's like, as a matter, I got this bottle, and you push me. So if I tell them what to do, what is going to be their response to that?
No.
Right. Whose success and failure is it if they take my advice? It's mine. It never becomes intrinsic. So when we have people who have bad attitudes and they're asking us for stuff that we can't possibly do, our job is to help them find new goals. We can't do that. There were situations where I was not able to get my dad's car. But in each of those situations, I had a decision to make. I could have acted a fool and made a scene. "Ah, you never give me the car." And what would have happened with me getting that car? It would have got further away. Right? It would have got further away. And so we have to be helpful in that way. So the other thing that I want to talk about is this idea of the illusion of knowledge. The illusion of knowledge. We actually think we know stuff when in fact we don't. Oftentimes we don't know stuff, but we think that we do. So at the bottom of page 2, what I'd like for you to do is I want you to draw a bicycle. Draw a bicycle as best you can. Also, I wanted to make note, if you have a smartphone, please keep it on and you can keep it out. At the top of the slides, you can ask questions just by going to that Google link. So if you have a question or a comment, feel free to go to that Google link at the top of the presentation. Illusion of knowledge. We think we know stuff, and sometimes we actually don't know what we think we know. So I'd like for you to share your bike with your neighbor. And we're going to watch this. We'll watch this clip. Here we go. Okay, I'm not getting audio, but I'm smart enough to be able to make this work. So, looking at this bus, which direction is this bus going? If it were to start driving right now, which way would it start driving? To the right or to the left? Either. Someone said either way. Oh, neither way. All right. This is what I will tell you, that children under 7 years old typically get this right every time. Illusion of knowledge. Illusion of knowledge. So the illusion of knowledge says that there are certain ways in which we see the world that we actually believe are true, when in fact they may not be necessarily true. So how many people have one of those things, those smartphones? Right? Do you know how your smartphone works? So if all the pieces of your smartphone were placed on a table, could you put it back together and make it work? So for the most part, for me, it's magic. You know, as far as I'm concerned, it's magic. It's way beyond my comprehension. Do you know how a zipper works? How does a zipper work? So the teeth, right? Yeah.
Unless you're in traffic, nobody does the zipper.
Oh, she said, unless you're in traffic, and then the zipper never works. It never works. Not in Minnesota. So this idea that we operate and we're in a world that we believe to be a reality or truth, when in fact we don't necessarily have all of the skills necessary to recognize what that world is. And so from a child's perspective, this bus would be moving towards your left, right? It will be moving towards your left. And why is that from a kid's perspective? Yes. Because the door is on the other side, right? And so kids ride buses all the time, and so for them, this is a complete bus. For adults, we would say, well, there's no headlights. Where are the brake lights? Where's and what school district is that would not have all those things, right? So we complicate those things when in fact, kids, we overthink things, and kids are really good at recognizing the simplicity of things. So, Let me go back to my clicker. So let's go back. I'm going to talk a little bit about the forms of, the other way. The forms of the illusion of knowledge. So there's this idea that truth equals facts, or facts equal truth. And that is an illusion of knowledge. Because facts don't equal the truth. Example. In 1986, my teacher asked me a question on one of our weekly quizzes. And this was the question. How many planets are there in the solar system? And in 1986, what was my response? 9. We ask a 6th grader today, how many planets are there in the solar system? And the answer commonly is 8. Why? Because Pluto is no longer a planet, right? So facts don't equal the truth. Facts don't always equal the truth. There's this idea of cognitive dissonance, that there's a gap between what we think and what is outside of us. And so an example of that would be, have you ever walked into someone's home and there's a picture on the wall that is crooked? What is your first inclination, or at least my first inclination is to try to sneak over and figure out a way, and right? Because I have this cognitive dissonance. The way things are supposed to be and the way things are not the same. We have this idea of conformity, that it is better to say nothing or to fit in with the crowd, to better adapt or be a part of that. When in fact, that is also an illusion of knowledge, because the crowd does not always know best. It does not always know best. And then there's social conditioning, which is us learning how to behave or how to act in a particular society. These are all forms of the illusion of knowledge. And then there are two counterbalancing concepts. One is called the imposter syndrome. Has anyone ever experienced the imposter syndrome? Like you're good at something, but you're like, I'm almost too good at this. I must be doing something wrong because I do this so well. Anyone ever had that experience, right? Or feeling unsure because other people aren't getting it the same way you are? That's the imposter syndrome. The counterbalance is the Dunning-Kruger effect. And the Dunning-Kruger effect says that incompetent people are so incompetent that they can't see their incompetence. Have you ever experienced somebody like that? They'll say, I'm the best at everything. I am so the best. The best is who I am, and I'm blah, 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 blah. Right? This is what I would like to offer you. White primacy is an illusion of knowledge. Many people have heard of the concept of white supremacy. Have you heard that? Right? I don't necessarily agree with white supremacy because it means that people actually think that they're so-called better than everybody else. And I think there is a population of people who believe that, but I think more folks fall into the category of being in white primacy. And primacy means that that my particular way of seeing the world is the way that by which everything else gets measured. I am primal. I'm prime, right? And everything else gets measured by me. And I would suggest that people who find themselves in this position that say they feel like they have to be better than someone else are actually hiding something. My mother taught me this lesson when I was 17. And she told me, I was playing Atari 2600. I don't know if anybody knows anything about that. So I'm playing my little video game. Now, I understand why kids have ADD. Because when I was playing video games, you had one stick and one button. I don't know if you've seen their new controllers. They got like 30 buttons on there, and they're trying to... So my mother said to me, she said, Andre, I want you to take out the trash. Now, I was 17, so I'm feeling myself. I'm like, Mom, I'm not taking out the trash. I'm grown. And she was like, you're grown. I was like, yeah. She said, Andre, make up your bed. I don't have to make up my bed. I'm grown. Andre, take a bath. I don't have to take a bath. I didn't have to take a bath. I'm grown, right? So one day she got tired of this, so she grabbed me by my collar when I said that. She grabbed me and she said, son, I don't ever want you to forget this. If you are something, you don't have to tell me. So I took a bath on my own. I made my bed on my own. Right? Why? So when you hear people having these qualms or these questions about their supremacy, what they're suggesting is, I don't feel comfortable with me, so I have to make me better than someone else. Because if you are better than someone else, you don't have to say it. Love LeBron James. His numbers speak. Whether you like him, whether you whatever, his numbers speak louder. His performance speaks louder than any other conversations that can be had about LeBron James. I believe he is the GOAT, right? The greatest of all time in this generation, and his numbers will continually prove that. So we have to recognize that race is in fact an illusion of knowledge. So what is race? So what we understand about this concept of race is that race is not a biological function. That race isn't biological. And what I mean by that is that there are no particular markers that on a genetic level would separate one particular race from another. However, there are markers that are contextual that separate or that could be determinant of particular types of people groups. As an example, sickle cell anemia. That is not a African American or black trait. It can be traced, but it is actually from all those folks from the Mediterranean. In Mediterranean areas of the world, and so there's a swath of people groups from North Africa, from Italy to Greece, that stretches all the way across the Asian, all the way over to the Asian peninsulas that have the sickle cell trait, but it's not a racial trait. Right? So race is not biological. Race is also, we know that it's geopolitical, right? So what are some of the races that are denoted in the United States? What are some of the races that are denoted in the United States? You've seen them on yes.
White, black.
So white, black, Asian, Hispanic, Pacific Islander, Native American, Eskimo. Cool, great. You just hit all the ADA and all the EEOC, so you hit all of them. Do you think those are the exact same in Canada? They're not. Right? Are they the exact same in Mexico? Are they the same in Brazil? Are they the same in South Africa? Are they the same in Australia? And I would say no. And I picked all of those countries because they're more westernized countries, so apples to apples. Right? So race is a political construct. Now, people will say that it is a social construct. Anyone ever heard someone say that? Right? That race is a social construct. I would suggest that race is used by societies, but it's actually constructed by governments. It is constructed by governments. A Ford F-150 anywhere on the planet is still what? A Ford F-150. But we can't say that about racial groups. Did you know that there are no Hispanics in Mexico? When do they become Hispanics? When they come to the United States. There are no Hispanics in Mexico. And so when we think about this idea of race, we have to start being more, we have to be more critical in our thinking and in our interactions. So let's get to an activity. On page 3, there's some other things about the truths about race. Race is a modern idea. It has no genetic basis. Humans, there's no human subspecies. Skin color is only skin deep. Most variations are within, not between races. Slavery predates race. Race and freedom evolved together. Race justifies social inequalities as natural. Race isn't biological, but racism is still real. And color blindness will not end racism. So let's cut to, let's skip over to page 5. And what I want you to do is I want you to spend some time thinking about this idea of the illusion of knowledge. So on page 5, there's a chart. And on the top of the chart it says African American, European American, Latino American, Asian American, Disabled American, and Native American. What I'd like for you to do is to tell us what the groups on the side taught you about those categories. So what did friends and family say about those groups across the top? What did your friends say about those groups across the top? What did school and workplace teach you about those groups across the top? What did TV and movies teach you about those groups across the top? And then from personal experience, what have you found? But I want you to answer this in a particular kind of way. What I want you to do is to put a plus if the conversation or the things that they talked about were positive. I want you to put a minus if the things that they talked about were negative. And if there was nothing ever spoken about those groups, I want you to put a 0. You can have pluses and minuses in the same box, but the size of your plus and the size of your minus will dictate how much you learn. So a big plus is lots of positives, a little minus is a little bit of negative. All right? So pluses, minuses, and zeros. And I'll give you just about, probably about 3 minutes to briefly brush through those things. All right? I'll check the notes and see if anyone left a note or a question while you're doing that.
Having a sound problem?
Yeah, we went over. Right. Yes. Thank you. All right, I'd like for you to stop right where you are, and I'd like for you to get into groups of 3 or 4, hopefully no more than 4, but groups of 3 and 4, and just feel free to talk about your pluses, your minuses, and your zeros. Feel free to share what you want to share, but you don't have to share what you don't want to share. All right, so I'll give about 5 minutes. So at 11:10. We'll reconvene. All right. So if you can get into groups of 3 or 4, no more than 4. 3, 2, 1, and so one thing I want us to do is, so the Walker Art Center is one of my favorite places on the planet. Love the Walker Art Center. But last year they made a really bad mistake. You guys remember what that was last summer? Yeah. So they were they were redoing the art gallery, their garden, the outside garden, which is one of I love that place. So I haven't been there since they've redone it. Is it pretty good? Is it still? Okay. You missed the hedges. Okay. So my favorite was did they keep the wooden horse made out of driftwood?
I don't see that one. I live like a mile away.
Oh, okay. You don't see that. Okay. So, but they were trying to. They had bought an exhibit that had a gallows that was supposed to represent the zaniness of capital punishment and whatnot. And there were 7 pieces, and one of those was to commemorate the Dakota 38 hangings. And does anyone know what mistake they made? Because it was a good thing to try to do. What was their mistake? Yes.
If I remember correctly, like they didn't consult or talk to like people of that Native American nation.
Yeah, so they didn't talk to the Dakota, right? So they were telling other people's stories without talking to the people whose story they were telling. So what I don't want you to do is to tell other people's stories in how in what we were just sharing. But what you can do and what they could have done was shared. This is our learning from their story. That'd have been a totally different thing, but they didn't do that. So we'll get to that part later. But I'm really curious, as you were going through that chart, were there some things that you learned about yourself? What did you learn about yourself as you were putting pluses, minuses, and zeros?
Regardless of what I saw in other areas, my personal experience has been positive.
So your personal experiences have been positive, although you may have seen or heard or had conversations around things being negative. All right. Other folks, what did you learn? Yes.
It's more came from the grandparents and has gotten less through the parents and less as you went, and then my personal experience has been all positive.
So your personal experience has been positive, but your grandparents were bad, but your parents were better than your grandparents, and you hope that you were better than they were. Is that illogical? Okay, cool. I don't want to put words into your mouth. Right? Why were your grandparents so bad? Anybody have bad grandparents? Why were they, particularly around these issues, why were they bad? The different times. They're a product of their times, right? So I find it interesting that there are these nuts that are actually seeds called, we call them Brazil nuts. But I know that other people have called them other things. And they're usually around Christmas time. They're like an orange wedge. They're mahogany. And so some people's parents or grandparents or whatnot will refer to them as nigger toes. I am not condoning the use of that word or that, but I find it interesting that they called them that. But today, what would we say about people who would call them that? We might call them racist, right? We would say, don't say that. That's not, the right thing to say. Right? They were a product of their time. They were a product of their time. So how do we help those people who were a product of their time to recognize today's time, today's context? We educate. How else?
We speak up.
We speak up. How well does it go over trying to educate your grandmother on something? So if that worked for you, I will give me the tip, because that didn't work. What do we do for those folks? we love them and hold them accountable. We love them and hold them accountable. Grandma, stop saying that. I love you, but stop saying that. Right? You know, we have to stand up and speak out, but we do it with compassion and love because they are a product of their environment, which means that we're also a product of our environment, and at some point somebody's going to have to. Okay, here's one to think about. This is a noodle twister for you, right? There will come a time when men and women use the same restroom at the same time. I mean, public facilities. That time is going to come. Now, I want you to think about that. And so some of you giggled, some of you are like, oh no, right? That's the same way that people felt about African Americans and white people being in the same spaces, the same restaurants, the same swimming pools. Context is everything, and context continually changes. It continually changes. And what I would suggest to you is that these pluses, these minuses, these zeros become a roadmap for you to look at your life and say, what are my goals and are my experiences living up to my goals? If I'm set on fire, I know what I'm supposed to do. Doesn't mean I do it, but I know what I'm supposed to do. What are you supposed to do if you find yourselves aflame? Stop, drop, and roll. How do you know that? How many of you have been there? You practiced that live? You know, live? Most of us haven't practiced it live, right? How do we know that? We were taught that. We practiced it. There were songs, there were movies. We did all this kind of stuff. But when people say stuff that's inappropriate in front of us, what is our typical response? We freeze. Why? Because we don't know what to do. We don't know what to do. So now, after today, you don't have any excuses. Because just like you learn how to stop, drop, and roll, you need to start practicing how to have these conversations with people who are obstinate about our human existence. I'm not talking about just, slight political views that suggest that we should do things a little bit differently, but I'm talking about those views that suggest that certain people shouldn't have, period, shouldn't have life, shouldn't have liberty, shouldn't have all the stuff that's in the paper. Right? That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about, not our differing methods. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or independent, I'm not talking about that kind of stuff, but I'm talking about those people who actually believe that some people aren't human and don't deserve all the things that the Constitution says they should. So how do you combat that? You combat that with compassion and love, and you speak up and you practice. You practice. Because evil prevails when what? Good people say nothing. I learned that being on boards. I learned that on boards, right? Because they come up with something, it's called Robert's Rules of Order. Anyone ever heard of that, right? So Robert's Rules of Order. So in Robert's Rules of Order, there are 4 ways in which decisions are made. So they present something, and they say, well, this is the thing, we're going to decide on the thing. All in favor? Aye. Here, aye, right? All opposed? Nay. No. All those who have some kind of conflict with this thing, can't really support it, can't be written down in the record as being for it, you have the option to abstain, which means I don't want to be a part of it. So I raise my hand and I say I abstain. And what is the 4th way that decisions get made using Robert's Rules of Order? You say nothing. And so your silence is taken as what? Whatever the group is doing, I'm down with that. I'm supportive of that. Richard Nixon, I am not a crook, coined this phrase, the silent majority. So he said, I'm going to do these things because I know that there are the silent people who don't feel that they have a voice. That I will be their voice. All those silent people will be their voice. The silent majority. So if we don't stand up, if we don't say things, then evil prevails. On page 4 are the bogus definitions of race in the United States. And I say bogus because they even say that they're bogus, right? So I was the EEO officer for Anoka County, and so I was responsible for doing this stuff for the county. And this is what the federal government says. The federal government, the EEOC, is a federal agency under the Department of Commerce, which is an interesting thing too, but we'll get to that at another training. So this is what it says. The EEO reporting. Employers are required to attempt. Now that's an interesting little phrase. Are required to attempt. Doesn't mean they have to do. It means that they are required to attempt. So you just got to try. Just try. So employers are required to attempt to allow employees to use self-designation to complete the EEO report. If an employee declines self-identification, employment records or observable identification may be used. What does that mean in plain English?
That means whatever you assume that person to be.
If you don't fill out the form, some random person will fill out the form for you. And you look really Asian American. We're low on Asian Americans, so you didn't fill out the form, so I'm going to put your mom. That's how the process goes down. So that's the person that's why it's bogus. The second part is this. This is really interesting. Race and ethnic designations as used by the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission do not denote scientific definitions of anthropological origins. So they're telling us what doesn't declare it, but they don't tell us what. What does declare it? And what does declare race or ethnicity if they're not using science? They make it up. They make it up. So there are these categories, right? So there's Hispanic and Latino. There's American Indian. There's Asian. There's Black. There's Native Hawaiian. There's white. Is there any other group that's missing out of that? You can read it on your own, but there are no Soviets mentioned in any of the Soviet bloc countries are not mentioned in the designation of so-called racial or ethnic categories. And why is that? Because Russians aren't human. They are the enemy, right? So why would we want to give our enemy our political enemy a designation? So I think that's interesting. Just a couple of other things, and I'll wrap up my time here. Is this idea of these obstacle illusions, right? These barriers. So there are a couple of barriers that we have to overcome so that race does not block us from being able to be effective. One is historical trauma. We have to recognize that there's a misnomer with historical trauma. The concept of historical trauma suggests that there were things that happened in the past that my ancestors experienced, that I may have experienced, that are lingering issues. I would suggest to you that if those issues have not been resolved, either through systems or through individuals, that they're actually current traumas. So historical trauma continually happens currently. Can you imagine someone stealing your car across the street and you get to watch them use your car every day, and you've gone to the legal system and you've done all this kind of stuff, but you watch them use your car every day? How does that make you feel at a certain point? Yeah, do you feel very neighborly? Right? That is the existence of American Indians. Seeing all this good stuff being used by other folks and seeing the crumbs that they have left. Interesting. Institutional racism. We have to recognize in 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, the 13th Amendment was signed in 1865, which ratified the system of slavery being outlawed, and it's not until 1864 that we get equal rights in jobs. That we get equal rights in jobs. And so systemic racism is suggesting that there are environments in which racism was the predominant way of operation. And so we have to recognize that there are still legacy pieces of that still today. And then lastly, this idea of poverty. We always talk about poverty, and we talk about the people, but we never talk about the systems that people are responding to that are these poverty systems. That's my alarm. I apologize. Let me make sure I don't go over. And then lastly, this idea of whiteness. Whiteness is problematic because it operates on one assumption. And the assumption is that all white people are created equal, which is why I believe a number of white young men are shooting up schools, because they're now coming to the realization that they don't have all the gifts that whiteness was supposed to give them. They're not in the cool clique. They don't know how to deal with the bullies that are bullying them, because they're not supposed to bully them because they're white. Whiteness says that all white people are created equal. But white people will tell you that that's not true. What do white people call white people who don't measure up to the level of sophistication that white people think they should? They call them trailer trash. They call them white trash. They call them rednecks. They call them all sorts of other things. This is what white people do to other white people. So this concept of whiteness can be problematic as well. When we think about these ideas or these concepts of race, we can't let them, we have to recognize that we are all in a system of racism. We're all in a system of racism. How many of you are capitalists? How many of you are capitalists? Raise your hand if you are a capitalist. Some of you are looking at me like you don't know what that means, so I'll just break it down, right? So are you a communist? Let's start there. No? Okay, so most people are like, and even if they were like, not in this atmosphere, I'm not raising. Are we socialists? I would say we have some socialist tendencies, but we're not a socialist government, right? We are a representative democracy. And we use capitalism as our way of doing business, right? So capitalism is buying and selling goods and services. Do you buy and sell goods and services? Raise your hand if you buy and sell goods and services, right? So you certainly buy, right? But you offer your services for money, right? So money is the currency in a capitalist society. Please raise your hand if you use money in all of its forms. You, my friends, are capitalists, right? Because you're in a capitalist society. I want to make the argument with you, or I want you to think about this, that just as you are capitalist, you are also racist. You are also racist. We live in a racialized society. Raise your hand if you have a race. You've checked it off on a box somewhere at some point. You have a race. You, my friend, are racist because you have the currency of the society. Now, so when I did this with my college students, some of them like gasped, right? They were like, I'm not racist. I'm not. But I want to plant the seed in your thought. Having the flu does not make me a bad person. Making sure that I give you the flu makes me a bad person. So if we're in this racist society and we all have the elements of racism, the question isn't, do I have the flu or not? Am I racist or not? That's a sidebar. The question is, what do I do with the situation that I'm in? And so with my privilege, my power, what do I do with that? Do I ignore my flu and infect lots of other folks? Or do I take accountability for my fear and try to figure out how I can become a different or a better person. Last thing, and I'm 1 minute over, so I will stop right here, is this idea of we need to recognize that there are adverse childhood experiences that impact us to this day. And so on page 7, you'll see that recognize that bigotry, prejudice, and discrimination are related, very much like cognitive behavior therapy, where bigotry is emotion, prejudice is thoughts, and discrimination is the behavior. And then lastly, this idea of power and privilege, whether you have privilege or you are a person without privilege, if we're not careful, the free-range chicken costs more than a conventional chicken, but they both have the same destiny. So whether you have power and privilege or not, or you have freedoms or not, if you're not careful, you will have the same fate as those who don't have power and privilege. My name is Andre Koen. I really appreciate your time. Thank you. Have a great day. Any questions, comments, observations before you go? Cool. Take it easy. Thank you. I'm a riot at funerals, bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it.
Yep.
Always a pleasure.
You're welcome.
You want to stay back and see if she needs help? I have to go meet with Tiffany.
Hi, Mr. Koen. I'm Sharon. It's
Hi,
nice
Sharon.
to
Good
meet
to meet
you.
you as
I
well.
enjoyed your talk. It was really informative.
Good.
And you said you worked for Anoka County
Yep, I
for
did.
6 years?
Yep. So I was their affirmative action officer. So much like, do you know Tertia? Who's here? Okay.
I just started
Alyssa.
here.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So, sorry about that. Yeah. So that's what I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did you get into that?
That's a good question. Other than the fact that I've been doing diversity work for a long time, I taught high school and did some college stuff. A position came open. I just kind of went out there and applied and got it. You know, not under my powers. It was God's will that it happened. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So, are you thinking about trying to do that kind of thing?
Yeah. So I switched fields and I was looking more into diversity work. So I went to St. Nola for American Racial Multicultural Studies.
Yep.
And that's what I want to do is teach on the level of diversity. I thought county would enter that in and it plays a part in that more than I found in the corporate arena. Where, well, depending on where you work in corporate arena. But I just started here, but I still like.
I would say, get engaged with the employee engagement folks.
Yeah.
I mean, they're doing great stuff here.
Yeah.
So you can find ways to get in, and to be quite honest, once you kind of start doing that stuff, that'll get particularly in county government, that'll get you your foot in the door.
Okay.
For doing further work.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Because it's such a vast field of wondering, like, how do I
Yeah.
break into that?
Yeah, I would say just make sure you interject yourself in those committees and that kind of stuff, and that'll help you.
Wonderful.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Your name again?
Sharon.
Sharon.
Yes.
Okay.
And
Good
I
to
could
meet you,
tell
Sharon.
when you're preaching. Well, he's a preacher. My grandfather is a minister.
Okay.
Ministry has been my life. So it's like, you at somebody's church.
No, it
You
is.
can always tell.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I am not ashamed.
Yes, amen.
Andre, you want a cookie? Sharon, did you get one? Okay, there's more left. I didn't come for a cookie. Okay, they put it down.
That time goes so fast.
It does go fast. Thank you very much for coming.
So fast.
Really appreciate it.
So I've got 2 more of these today, so that'll be fun.
You want to take a couple of these?
Yeah.
No, it's not, I can always eat them later. Take a couple, because there's plenty here. That's it? Oh, okay. And they did approve the check, so it should be going in your account. So if it doesn't, you let us know, and let me know.
I will.